Okay. Gwyn has asked me to introduce Sandra Waddock this afternoon. A couple of months ago, ASP helped us out at the University of Cumbria with a book launch, and Sandra was one of the authors, and we reconnected once again. I've known Sandra since at least sometime in the mid 1990s, I think, and we at that event a couple of months ago connected the dots, and it was Malcolm McIntosh who really brought us together. And it's a name that many of you will recognize in the network here, someone who lived in Bath. And the last time was actually at the memorial service for Malcolm at the Tate in London. Sandra is the Carroll Scholar of Corporate Responsibility, the Galligan Chair of Strategy, and Professor of Management at Boston College, where she has worked since I think around 1986, so 35 years. And Sandra is someone that is very widely published, 15 books and 170 articles and book chapters. And on Google Scholar, she's the most cited author in the world on Google Scholar in corporate responsibility and in social partnerships. What's interesting about Sandra, and we talked about this a couple of months ago on that book launch, is the way in which her scholarship and her writing and thinking has evolved over those 35 years. And interestingly, the key words that I would identify, at least that stand out to me of some of her recent titles, are words like paradox and transformation and healing and shamans. Her most recent book is Transforming Towards Life-Centered Economics. And another one is Management and the Sustainability Paradox. And the one that I like the best is Healing the World, Today's Shamans as Difference Makers. So really pleased to welcome Sandra today and looking forward to hearing what she has to tell us. Welcome, Sandra.
Thanks, David. Thank you, Gwyn, for inviting me. I'm not, I can't remember what I spoke about at the session. I'm going to talk a little bit about the shaman experience and why it's important, and then we'll just open it up. I'm not going to talk very long, although I could do a presentation if you wanted, but I don't think anybody wants that. Since you all know Malcolm, I thought I'd start with or some of you know Malcolm anyway, knew Malcolm. Who was just wonderful shaman himself, just an incredible person who pulled no punches and really told it like it was, and cared deeply about equity and sustainability in the world, and far ahead of most people in his thinking, way, way ahead. So when I wrote the book Intellectual Shamans, out of which some of the work that I'm going to talk about today comes, all of it comes, that and healing the world, which is sort of a more popular integration of that work. Malcolm said, shamanism is a spiritual presence and is not just found in people. It is a light that can shine from a place, a piece of music, or an object, such as a tree or a rock. Your shamans have seen that light and been brave enough to talk about it. Now, Malcolm himself was this kind of visionary, and he saw the world clearly in ways that other people did not. And in a sense, if we hope to begin to heal the world, I think that's what we need to do collectively. And I've been working on this for the last 10 years or so. So as David knows, I started out doing work on corporate social responsibility, public-private partnerships, what we today would call cross-sector social interactions, all of which are really important and I think do some good in the world. But maybe about 10 years ago, I began to realize that having companies become more socially responsible in their current framing wasn't going to get us where we need to go as a world. And so I started working on ideas of system transformation. And part of that is this sort of shamanic journey, I guess, that I've been on. So, 30 years ago, I started reading about shamanism. But I never told anyone because I was a management professor. And in a Catholic institution, a Jesuit institution, true, but a Catholic institution, and you just in a management school, and you just don't talk about stuff like that there. But over the years, I wrote a book back in the aughts, in about, I think it was published in 2008, called The Difference Makers. Malcolm was part of that book. And it was a group of people who had actually started what I today would call the social responsibility infrastructure. So people who founded the UN Global Compact, the person who wrote the Millennium Development Goals was in it, Malcolm was in it. And these people had started a number of what are today major institutions around corporate responsibility. And it was clear, and I had always done this work at the macro level, but it was clear to me from doing that work that individual agency matters and individual leadership matters. And these people just had that light that Malcolm talked about. They brought it with them wherever they did, and they saw beyond the current structure, and they were willing to take the risks of taking chances to build something that everyone thought was kind of crazy. And so that sort of spawned in my head the idea that maybe some academics were like this too. And so I decided to take the risk to study the people whose work I admired in the academy, who had crossed these boundaries and who really saw things differently and who were making sense in ways that other people weren't. And I ended up interviewing 28 people and calling them intellectual shamans. And people say, well, did they object to being called a shaman? The answer is no. All of them sort of bought into that and were quite happy to be included in the book and then be called by that weird name. And so that was sort of a coming out, if you will, for me of, I do have this interest. I do try to practice this. And what does it all mean? So if we think about the kinds of systemic changes that we need to ensure the thriving of humans on our planet and the thriving of other beings on our planet, then we need to begin to see the world differently. We need to, in a sense, we need to go back to the ways that many indigenous peoples understand the world, that we as humans are connected to part of nature. And unless we understand that in that way, in that sort of grounded way, and operate our social institutions and our businesses in that way, we are going to continue to do harm in the world. Because from a Western perspective, we've adopted this idea that we are dominant, or we dominate nature. We should dominate nature. We can exploit nature for the resources that she can give us, without understanding that, as the Lakota say, that we are all related. I can't say it properly. Mitakuya Oyasin. We are all relatives. All are related. All my relations. And when we understand the Pan-African saying Ubuntu, we are. I am because you are. I am because we are. That we are all one. But when we think that way, that in a sense is how shamans think, because shamans believe that there's spirit in all, not in the tree that's outside my window here, in the rocks, and of course in other beings and in other living beings like dogs and cats and cows and horses. So I think that's a very different kind of perspective, and it's the kind of perspective that the shaman brings us. So my work today is all about rebuilding the world in a way that transforms the system in multiple levels towards greater sustainability with flourishing for all. And I can talk, if you want, about how some of that work is evolving. But let me talk a little bit about what the shaman is. Because in our world today, though many of you may be familiar with this, but in our world today, most people don't identify as shamans. And yet there are many people, probably most people in this Zoom call, who are serving the role and doing the work of the shaman. So what do shamans do? Well, of course, in traditional cultures, they are the medicine men and medicine women, the healers. So the first function of the shaman is healing. In order to heal, they need to see the system as it is. They need to find that light. Actually, the great songwriter Leonard Cohen wrote a song called Anthem, in which he says the closing words are, there's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in. And shamans can see that light coming in. And my friend Jim Walsh, who's at the University of Michigan, always talks about being attracted to people of light. So think about the people the people you are attracted to, who you want to spend time with. And somehow they do have that light that Malcolm talked about, that they exude that light. And that's what we're attracted to. So when we want to do the work of the shaman, it's that healing light. It's that desire to make the world a better place. That something goes beyond us. That's what shamans do. Now, traditional shamans heal patients, individual patients, but much of the work of the shaman today, I think, is in the broader domain of trying to heal our relationship to the world. So Serge Kahili King talks about the shaman as a healer of relationships. And that could be a relationship with me and myself, or me and others, me and my friends, me and the world, me and other people, me and society, me and the world, or the relationships among humans and other beings, whether those beings are alive in our traditional sense or not. So there's 3 core tasks that shamans typically undertake that I write about in my book. One is the healing function. So their work is oriented towards healing. The second is making sense of that. It's called sense making. The second is connecting. So shamans go across boundaries in order to gather information, bring it back. And when they've got that information, then they can begin to use it for healing purposes. And then they make sense out of it. That's how they heal. And why the sense-making function is really important, because that's what Carolyn Egri and Peter Frost, in writing the only 2 management articles I could find about shamanism in management literature. There's much of course, in anthropology and elsewhere, but in management, there were only 2 before I wrote anything. And they talked about this function of sense making as a spiritual leadership function, because it helps to define the world. And why is that important? Well, from an anthropological sense, shamans believe that if someone gets sick, if I get sick, it's because there's something wrong with the story we're telling ourselves about how our society works, with our cultural mythologies. So cultural mythologies are the core stories that we tell ourselves. And shamans believe that if a patient is sick, it's because that cultural mythology is diseased or disordered in some way. And in order to heal the patient, you have to fix the story, to change the story. So that sense-making function becomes really, really important. There's a lot you can say about shamanism. Many people consider it a calling. So if you do the work of sustainability, you have in some way been called to do that work. And that answering that call, the call to shamanism, to do this healing, connecting, sense-making work, and can involve risks, because you may see the world differently than other people do. You may have to speak truth to power. You may have to say or do or write, be things, or be out there in the world in ways that people aren't comfortable with. And so that can be risky. And it takes you off the beaten track and onto some track that other people don't necessarily follow. That connecting function means for me, it means taking information from here and there and over there, and somehow bringing it together in new ways, crossing sector boundaries, crossing disciplinary boundaries, crossing for traditional shamans, it's spiritual boundaries. So they do their work often by going into a trance state, and in that trance state, go into spiritual realms and back, so that they can use it to help heal the patient, to help heal that cultural mythology in a sense. As change makers, I think we are shamans are known as shapeshifters. They in theory can become the tree, become the jaguar, become the leopard, whatever. But as shamans today, we're doing something slightly different. We're trying to shape the shift that we need. And let me just say one more thing. The word shaman, it comes from the Tungus Manchur language of Siberia. So I thought of that as that was interesting to learn. And then one day I got an email from somebody and from that region, and he said, the word sham in Tungus means knowledge, and the word man means liker or lover. So when you put the two together, it becomes lover of knowledge. Isn't that cool? I just thought that was so cool. Anyway, so why don't I could probably say a whole lot more, but maybe I should open it up and we can have a discussion about all these weird ideas.
Do people want to raise their hands if they'd like to ask a question, or post a question in the chat, perhaps?
Or just have an exchange.
Thank you very much for that. It's really, really interesting. And apologies, there's a lot of background noise here right now, so I hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just really, really interested. You mentioned that there were two papers, published research papers in the management literature on the role of shamanism. And I just wondered if you could share the links to those. I'd be really interested to see that. Not immediately, but just
yes,
outside the meeting. That would be really great. Thank you.
Yeah, I can share them with Gwen, and he can share them with you.
Yeah.
They're by Carolyn Egri and Peter Frost. And they were about organization development people, so people who actually help organizations to evolve. And so this was back in the they write in the 80s, I think. And they were talking only about organization development specialists as shamans. So I actually think there can be, and I've read that there can be shamans in all walks of life. So, you've been a lot of artists, in fact, are shamans. You can be a psychotherapist or a teacher or a sustainability practitioner. So you can be anything and be a shaman. It's about taking on that healing, sense making, and connecting function.
Yeah.
That set of functions in the service. I forgot to say, in the service of a better world.
Yeah. When you were talking, Sandra, it just made me think of people like Fritjof Capra. His connecting and sense making across many different realms in the scientific and other realms as well. And also you're talking about risk making and speaking truth to power. Those of us that have come from the RBP and AMSA communities, and I don't mean to be exclusive at all in this, but I'm sure others will have their own experiences of this, but it was really, I think lots of us were really struck by the tension that there was between those convening and holding that space and the wider hierarchy, if you like, because the sort of more managerial hierarchy just didn't really understand how to speak to that more shamanistic approach.
I think that's absolutely true. It's sort of why I hesitated for so many years to come out in this domain at all, because absolutely people don't get it unless it's a spiritual. So shamanism is basically considered the world's oldest set of spiritual traditions, and each culture has its own sort of way of practicing and its own rituals and things. And if you were practicing traditional shamanism, there's tons of rituals. I work with a modern shaman here in the Boston area, and we do no rituals. It's all about finding your own power and putting that power out in the world and doing good with it in some way. So yeah. Martin, you have your hand up?
Yeah, it was just, yeah, it was sort of based on the comment that you made at the end there, about what shaman meant. And then suddenly my mind went to what philosopher means, which is kind of a similar sort of thing, right? And then so we've all, assuming that we've all had Western education, we've got a kind of, we've got a sort of a solid-ish understanding of philosophy from the Western, sort of take of it, from ethics through to logic and stuff like that. And I was just wondering, so we've got, disciplines that are almost the same. And I was just wondering, from your point of view, what would you say is the fundamental difference between those two approaches, even though the words mean exactly the same thing? Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah. And let me just say to Linda, first of all, first off, Capra is one of my idols. And so his work truly informs everything I write about and think about. I've just so admired him for so many years, and everything I've read of his is just astonishing, basically. So as I see philosophers, in the work of philosophers, which I'm not 100%, familiar with, not being a philosopher myself, but doing that in the thinking domain and trying to figure out how the world is in the thinking domain, whereas the shaman is in a sense more hands-on, out there in the world, trying to do the change, make the change, do the active healing. So philosophy would be healing the way we think, and that's got to do with cultural mythologies, of course. So that's the sense-making function. But from it's more of a head thing in a sense. The philosophers in that work of sense-making in an intellectual way, whereas the shaman is out there in the world figuring out, okay, this is, and not always, sometimes, I think intellectual shamans are certainly doing that in much the same way that that a philosopher would. Some of them are philosophers, so I'm sure. But the healer is out there trying to do things that explicitly can heal the world in some ways. I think a little bit more tangible ways than I would think of a philosopher doing. But Martin, maybe you can give me a perspective on that. You moved.
Yeah, it does move, doesn't it? Yeah, so I studied philosophy, so I get that, and I haven't studied shamanism, and also I was raised a Catholic, and
Me too.
I've hung out with Jesuits, so I kind of get I kind of understand part of your journey, and I'm equally sort of thinking, okay, no, this other side of it is kind of, maybe that's the bit that's missing, just the connection to your body, it is all heady sort of stuff, isn't it?
Very heady.
But yeah, thank you.
I think that's one of the things that I personally had to learn. I was also raised Catholic, and I work in a Catholic Jesuit institution, but I can't identify with that anymore, because I'm much more if I have to put a label on it, maybe a pantheist. I think that there is life and consciousness, and if you read not just Capra, but some of the other physicists who write for the popular writing, not mathematical physics by any means, but but they write for people like us who are interested in that kind of stuff. There are some people who believe that the core of the universe is consciousness. And if that's the case, then that rock outside and that tree have a form of consciousness that we need to begin to pay attention to in different ways. And if we did that, that would totally change how we manage our businesses, how we live our lives, whether we exploit nature or not, because we would see ourselves in relationship in a different way. So, yeah, Robert.
Thanks, Anna. That was fabulous. It was really great to listen to you, and I want to read much of what you discussed. I wanted to ask you a question. It came up briefly earlier in this call. I studied philosophy, funnily enough, as well, many years ago, and then responsibility in business practice, which is kind of what's brought all of us here together ultimately. But I also did altogether over 20 years of work with indigenous. In many ways, I think taught me more than all the professors put together, and indeed all the business gurus put together too. But the issue I wanted to raise is it's been fun developing a reputation for being an iconoclast, but I drummed one of the papers for the Responsibility in Business Practice master's program back in the 1990s, which was partly because I'm just difficult and a contrarian and shamanically trained, but it's also because I actually could not express in kind of logical, linear, linguistic terms what I was trying to convey, which was my sense of my felt relationship. But they nearly threw me out for that. And the reason I'm mentioning it now is because as a consultant and writer and feeler and drummer in this field, I want to make change. In the time I have left this this go around, I want to do what I can to help catalyze change. But if I do it in the kind of logical linear language way, which I'm trained to do, doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference. I've been trying to do this for over 30 years in the consultancy field. But if I go all the way to drumming was because a shaman from Guatemala helped me to tell a story which explained why I was drumming this damn thing. And they were kind of like, okay, it's not that we're letting you off the drumming, you just articulated it in language, so we're going to give you this postgraduate degree. And so I'm kind of stuck in the middle. I can't seem to get people to change or their understanding. I'm trying to be a connector, a healer, and a communicator, but I'm not making much headway here as a catalyst, either by drumming or by writing and speaking. So what the fuck do I do next?
I have no idea. I feel some of your frustration. The world, I mean, isn't it ironic that when you can see some of the connections that need to be made, but it's so hard for other people not to see them in some way. And if people are in power, then they've benefited from the system the way it is, and so it makes it really hard for them to what is it? I can't remember the name, but it's very hard for you to see something if your paycheck depends on not seeing it. And that. But I think there's. This is going to sound a little arrogant, maybe. I think there's a human developmental thing. So one of the things I've studied a lot of is the stages of human development. And if you look at something like spiral dynamics or Bill Torbert's work or Bob Keegan's work on human development stages, Kohlberg really lays this out nicely. There's a pre-conventional level, which is where our kids are, right? And then there's this conventional level in which which most people sort of stay at for all their lives. And people look to the system around them or their tribe or their church or their, whatever institution is giving them a set of rules that says this is the way society is and this is how we need to behave in society. And that way of thinking is sort of almost, I always like George Bush, my way or the highway type. If it's not in my system, if my peers don't like it, if my church isn't telling me to do it, then it can't be right. If my tribe somehow says it can't be right. But the post-conventional level of development, which is harder for people to get to, allows you to see that there are multiple paradigms, that one isn't necessarily better than others, that when you think about moral choices, there are many ways of viewing that. And I'm not talking about relativism as much as I'm talking about the fact that you can see that, for instance, an Oriental perspective might be or an indigenous perspective might be very different from the Western sort of Enlightenment perspective that we are living with. And I think it's that perspective that's in a sense causing some of the problems. So I don't think I have any better answers than you do. And with my students, it takes a whole semester for them to begin to see that there's systemic issues. And yeah, I just wrote a paper on art and the role of art in system transformation, which is sort of what you're talking, drumming as an art, really, or getting into that sort of sensual experience of drumming. Wow, I think that's powerful. And all I can say is keep you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I think maybe
I'm not doing any better than you are, though.
maybe drum and write, and in a way, that's what the the academics who wanted to throw me out. We did the Bill Talbot, Lovinger's sentence completion assessments, and I was in the weird place of being in that particular non-hierarchy. I don't know what you want to call it.
Well, you're post-conventional thing. I suspect you're one of his alchemists. I know Bill because he was at BC for years.
I was
yeah.
exactly that, and the academics came in mostly as strategists, which is great in many ways. Because, but they nearly threw me out. Even they were new paradigm research, participatory action research, cooperative inquiry, genii.
Yeah, absolutely. If you read Beck and Cohen's Spiral Dynamics, you get to these, or any of Ken Wilber, you get to these sort of later stages of development, but people at other levels don't understand each other very well. So I don't understand. For instance, I believe, it's going to sound awful, but I believe that many Republicans and conservatives are at sort of a stage of development that is my way or the highway. Very conventional way of thinking. I have tried since Donald Trump got elected to begin to try to understand their thinking, because it was just so absolutely clear to me he was completely the wrong person for the presidency. I don't mean to get political, but it was just something I could see. And but people love him. And I don't get their thinking, because I can't get into their thinking and they can't get into my thinking. So that's kind of the problem that we face, is how do we open up these ways of communicating so that we can understand each other?
And that's why, so I'm not going to go on, I promise I won't take more than a little bit more airtime, but that's been my challenge, because I don't just want to be perceived as somebody who might be worth bothering to listen to, whether he's speaking or drumming. But most people just think I'm a troublemaker, and therefore I'm not a very effective change agent, and that's not good enough for me.
Well, yeah, I'm the same way. I mean, in my institution, I'm, David can say I've got all these citations and all, but that's probably the only reason they recognize me, because I've done a lot of work. They don't look at what I do, and fortunately for me, they don't.
Well, we'll do some drumming and dancing one day soon, I hope.
So, I think working at that heart level and that head level at the same time, and the gut level, because drumming gets into your gut, that can open people up. So, I just took a course with David Adams, who's in Britain somewhere. And he does this, it's through the H3 Uni organization. And it was on this wheel of wisdom. And it takes you around, it's sort of a traditional medicine wheel, and puts you in different perspectives, one of which is strategist. And so identify with something like that, because they can speak from their own voice in each of those positions. But it gets you to dealing with really core questions. Anyway, Dave.
Thank you.
Dave, you have a question.
Thank you. Yeah. First of all, Sandra, thank you so much for coming out all those years ago, if I can phrase it like that, and the courage that takes and took. My suggestion for Rob is singing and dancing as the new form of protest. But yeah, I've got a couple of questions. One's deadly serious, and the other's very, very light. So yeah, one of them is the links between this and autism and Asperger's, and I've just got this sense that there's some kind of connection. People like Greta, there's some work about autism that said the person that would save the planet would probably have Asperger's 10 years ago. And the one I think is non-serious is whether you're willing to disclose the animal or spirit or or being that you're channeling right here, right now. I put in the chat that I've got a sense of what it might be, but I'm not going to disclose. But there's a couple of friendly questions anyway.
Um, yeah, I don't know the link between Asperger's or autism. That's a very interesting question. There is, if you read into the literature on shamanism, many shamans were considered crazy. We Westerners first discovered them, if you will, and because they were going to other realms and stuff. And there is some sense that I've read a few places that talks about the psychotic experiences being very similar to the transcendental experience. And I wouldn't say that I've had a huge number of transcendental experiences or anything. I don't consider myself that advanced, actually. Yeah, there may be a link there. I just don't know what it is. That's worth researching, I think. As to the power animals, I have a bunch of them. I guess. No. I don't know what you're seeing, and I'm curious, so I'm gonna but I'll tell you, I hadn't thought about it in those terms. Eagle and raven, and maybe horse.
I definitely had bird family.
Who did you think?
Beautiful. Well, yeah, it was eagles, or it was definitely bird. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the seeing. So I'm a seer. If I were, I don't think it's for me to claim the mantle of shamanism, but I think we all need to do that too at the same time. But my gift, if I have a gift, it's just seeing these things that are in, and I point to it because that's sort of where they come to me from, in different realms, ideas usually, and it happens just like that for me sometimes. So I don't know if David knows this, but I wrote a book many years ago called Leading Corporate Citizens. And it came about because an editor came to my office at Boston College and started talking to me about a textbook. And I said, I'd never read a textbook, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, what if you were to write one, what would it be? And I said, well, we need this. And she left my office and I went, where did that come from? And for the next 5 months, I was possessed, literally. This book just came, it wrote me. Everything I needed to know about came to me just as I needed to know it. It was like channeling. It was channeling. I mean, I didn't really write that book. It wrote me. And, that's the only time that's happened with a book like that. But, it was quite an experience. And I wasn't so great to be around then because all I wanted to do was write. It was just amazing. It was an amazing experience. Anyway, so what about you? Have any of you, the rest of you, had these types of experiences or consider yourself in that realm? Georgia, we've only heard from men. How about you?
I haven't really had any kind of experience like this, but I did actually, so I've just finished my degree last year in philosophy, religion and ethics, and many of the things that you're discussing so came up, and it's been really interesting to hear people talk about their experience with studying philosophy and Western philosophy and not having this connection with shamanism, and that they felt like that was perhaps a missing piece in what they were wanting to pursue maybe in that train of thought. But for me, it's been quite the opposite, because my university is very diverse in the way that it wants to include multicultural attitudes into all aspects of the university, and sustainability is a huge element of that as well. So one of the things that part of my degree was religious anthropology, and we frequently covered subjects to do with shamanism and how that connected with the earth and how philosophical thoughts came in. So I would see that as more of me coming at this kind of experience purely academically, but it did definitely shape the way that I view our impact on the planet and how you interact with other people and all those kinds of things. So it's just been really interesting to listen to you all discuss stuff and think, wow, if my class has had you guys to listen to and to talk to as well, it would be perhaps like we'd be pursuing far more outside of our main course elements. And everybody was very interested in these subjects, but I don't think people know where to take them sometimes.
Yeah, no, and how you take them is where is it you can make a contribution. So, for instance, I'm an academic, you're an academic. You know, our work is intellectual work, but bringing the heart piece into that work in some way. And eventually, it took me a long time to get my voice, to find my voice, and to be able to admit to this this interest even. And I was afraid that I was afraid because I knew that my colleague didn't necessarily buy into any of this stuff. And so I've been surprised that I haven't gotten more backlash than I have once I sort of came out with it. But what I realize is there's a hunger among our colleagues in the academy, among people in general, I think, to make the world better. They see the inequities, they see the sustainability issues, even if they don't want to acknowledge them all the time because they're benefiting from them. They know something's wrong. And so in my way, my work is to help people understand that and do what they can do, because I think everybody, I guess that's part of the Healing the World book. That's what the message there is. We all can do something.
Sandra,
Yeah.
I'd like to jump in on that because you said about finding the voice. I think a lot of us are always on that cusp of trying to interface with, as you say, a different group of people who think differently and don't see the problems in the way that we do. And you mentioned early on in your talk, just in fleeting, about a jaguar. And I came across a stunning book last year called The Time of the Black Jaguar by Arkan Lashwala. In fact, Armin, the guy that wrote our website, gifted it me, which I was eternally grateful for. Mind-blowing book. He's basically a Peruvian shaman, and he gave me a beautiful phrase, which I now use in lecturing and talking with business people, and about what sustainability is, because it's a most abused and misused term, and very few people have a common understanding of it. But I just picked up the phrase that he used, and coming from the ancient Peruvian culture of that he says, when we forget to nurture what nurtures us, everything dies. So to me, I reverse that and say, well, sustainability is about...
David Corton talks.
Yeah. I was saying that for us, it's when we learn to nurture what nurtures us, then we'll be sustainable. And I'm just wondering what sort of vocabulary you use to try and build the bridges between these different ways of thinking and acting.
Well, I often refer to David Corton, who wrote a book in 1995 called When Corporations Rule the World. But he's a member of the Club of Rome, and he's become I think, a global thought leader, changing the world, sustainability issues. And he talks about, I use the phrase that he uses, which is similar to what you just said. We are living beings born of a living planet, and we forget that at our peril. And so just sort of grounding this is our reality. We are, you think you're separate from nature. You think you can dominate nature. You think nature is here for our human exploitation. But, we are nature. Nature is us. We relate to these other beings. We have to relate to them in different ways. And I'm as guilty as any other academic of flying around to conferences before the pandemic anyway, and doing things that are sort of not helpful to nature. But, I think I've always tried to couch, when I write for business, periodicals, journals, academic journals in particular, business terms, and then gently push towards a more holistic ways of thinking about them. So, or sometimes not so gentle, maybe. But, I don't know if that helps, but yeah. Hannah, you have your hand up.
Oh, hi there. Apologies for not having my visual on. My housemates we're in uni and they're all doing their exams today, so I try to not take too much signal off them. Really fascinating hearing you speak today, and it's quite a different approach to what I've been studying, because I do human geography. So we haven't really done any side of approaches. But I recently did a paper on like ecotourism, and it's fascinating. I feel like how like Western knowledge is, and go in, do you know what I mean, and transform and put their own ideas into natures, and how spaces have like, do you know what I mean, deteriorated quite often in Western knowledge, and how like indigenous knowledge, quite the opposite, would have, do you know what I mean, could have been benefited like the nature sites there. And yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. And, you know, so to Gwen's question, to approach things through the lens of something that people can identify with, you know, how do we develop a new kind of tourism? So one of the groups that I'm working with, this initiative called Bounce Beyond, which is trying to get us to bounce beyond the current economic system in particular towards one that helps things flourish. And one of the groups we're working with is Costa Rica. And Costa Rica is known for tourism. It's also known for the beauty of the land. And the guys heading all this up, they're talking about a regenerative Costa Rica, which includes a huge reorientation towards ecotourism, to just exploiting nature down there. So I think that, I don't know if that that adds anything. But some of the people that I'm working with in this, both the Bounce Beyond initiative and I'm working on something else called GAIN, the Global Assessment for New Economics, because I've been recently writing about what would a new economics look like. In GAIN, there are geographers, and I find geographers to be fascinating people, especially human geographers. I mean, not like I do, which is, and I was invited to give a talk at MIT to a group of human geographers. And at the time I had no clue. I'd never met a geographer, and I had no clue what they did. And these were the most interesting group of people. And they said, oh, well, we were criticized for being broad, but not very deep in our work. I said, you guys think like I do. You know, they're broad, and they're thinking about sustainability and the human impact on this and that, and how do we make it all better. And I'm like, and they're like, and I said, that's a critique. I think that's great. So now I've actually worked with a bunch of people who are geographers over the years, and I just find them to be the most interesting people. And it's what we need that perspective is what we need to bring into management, what the kind of thing that they would offer. Helena.
Thank you so much, Sandra, and it's really lovely to hear you. And David Corton, you mentioned, I love his book about Earth community, and he says we need to create really powerful stories against the neoliberal agenda, which I think is so important. To say to you, you know, in America you've got Trump, but we've had very sad divisions here in the UK around Brexit. They're really terrible divisions, and they do worry me a lot, and what's going on in the UK. But I suppose what I'd like to ask you, Sandra, I mean, you're here at our AGM, and I think there's a lot of energy. We're small, but there's a lot of energy and experience and goodwill in this meeting. And I just wondered if you've got any advice for us, you know, from your experience, because we want to grow, but we want to grow in the right way. And, you know, any thoughts or reflections?
So let me just reflect on this work that I've been doing with Bounce Beyond, because my friend Steve Waddell pulled a group of people together about a year ago. 2 years earlier, well, in 2017, yes, that's 4 years ago now, he had pulled another group together into a group that we ended up calling the SDG Transformations Forum. And that's where some of the human geographers I was just mentioning turned up. The forum's kind of dormant now, but out of that grew this initiative called Bounce Beyond. And we've spent the last year trying to build. It really takes a lot of effort and a lot of some interpersonal work as well, to build an initiative like this, because we're trying to do something that other people aren't doing. We are what we've come to call a transformation catalyst. And the idea is that we don't necessarily do the work, but we are trying to find groups like Costa Rica that I just mentioned that are doing this work and help them to develop more powerfully. So that's our particular role. That we believe that the efforts in Costa Rica can form themselves if they begin to see their system. So that scene function of the shaman, actually, if they begin to see their system more clearly, they can then make sense of that for other people, draw more people in, and build out what we call a powerful transformation system. And, you know, I don't know exactly the work that you all are trying to do, but, you know, there are, what I've noticed, I working with the doctoral student to do a study of this, there are a number of these now emerging. They didn't exist 20 years ago. They couldn't exist because partly it's this technology, this type of technology that allows them to exist, that brings people together. You can do some of that work in person, obviously, and probably it's better done in person. But I don't know, finding a project or a topic, one of the, I don't know where you all are located in England. But one of the other groups we're working with is South Devon, the Bioregional Center in South Devon. And they are trying to transform the whole region into, you know, a thriving bioregion. And their focus is bioregional. So we're trying to figure out how to do this on a global scale, ultimately. So, you know, who do you have there? What is your interest? How would you pull together? Maybe use a process, any number, there are a number of processes for the group. That something like, doesn't have to be any one of these in particular. A recuperator has put, you know, bring people together, or Otto Scharmer's Theory U, or an open space kind of format, and pull people together and see if something comes out of it about your shared aspirations that you can begin working on collectively. That would take some time, and, you know, probably happen over, you meet once a month, is that how you meet? Probably happen over a series of meetings, but over time you might be able to focus in on something that makes sense to do. Where you can all, and each of you doing that. The thing about a transformation catalyst is you realize that there's this piece over there, and that group over there is doing this, and that one over there is doing this. If they could cohere their efforts somehow, if they get connected, if they can cohere their efforts, then they can actually take much more effective action. And it isn't about, for Bounce Beyond, it isn't about us taking the action. It's about them figuring out how to take more effective action for their purpose. You know, so Bounce Beyond is basically have no resources, but we're still trying to do this work. Right now we're working with 4 different initiatives.
That sounds great. Thank you. Thank you, Sandra.
So you maybe think, I'll send you the paper's supposed to come out in a couple of days. I haven't seen proofs on it, so I don't believe that. I'll send you the paper though. I'll send you the Word version of it.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, Vicky?
I was just asking if there are any other questions. Comments, thoughts?
I would love to know more about all of you. Could we possibly go around and do quick introductions? Yes, please. You know.
Okay, Simon, I think maybe you said you might be in hospital, so it may be that it's not possible for you to speak. But if it is, please do. If not, what did you put there? Program to develop a framework for sustainability leadership in schools based on coaching values. It's too noisy to speak. Writing white paper now if others would like to contribute. Okay, thank you, Simon. Robert, you're next on my list.
This Robert.
This Robert.
Okay, the briefest one I can manage. Philosophy, as we heard, followed by 10 years in communications, corporate communications, followed by becoming a father, and part of the problem of which I was, and I was part of the solution where I was part of the problem, if you see what I mean. So I started taking comms and turning it into inventing what became corporate social responsibility. Triggered, as I say, by becoming a father. 31 years later, I became a grandfather, recalled the product because it had never really worked very well. And that's why I'm asking rather blunt questions like the one I posed earlier. You know, okay, so now, one generation later, I want to make, actually, we'll say this in closing, the combination of Jung's work with that of Wolfgang Pauli around kind of quantum physics meets human step changes through rites of passage at various key points in their lives, from adolescent transformation to midlife to late life transformation, is something I think we could put to good use in this, because there's a lot of leaders out there running global corporations and governments and so on, who probably, given the right catalytic nudge, informed perhaps by those elders of indigenous cultures who have shown us by bench testing their hypotheses over tens of thousands of years, how that might be achieved. Bring back those rites of passage in the boardroom and in the cabinet offices, and I think we might suddenly begin to see the kind of change we need. And because we need step change, these are step changes we're talking about, whether it's electrons or people. And that, for me, is the hypothesis I'm working on right now, but it may or may not work. Let's see.
But if you could bring a few of those, if this group could somehow bring a few of those folks together and think that, you know, what experiences do they need to see the world differently? What do they need to see that they're not seeing now? You may know, you know better than I, but how can you help them do that?
Well, we either got to make them laugh or we've got to make them terrified, or maybe both.
My students always start out totally depressed. But then I try to give them hope.
Yeah, you got to come out the other side of that, because it kind of incapacitates people. Thank you.
Who else would themselves? Maybe Louise?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I had to actually just go get my children from school, so I've literally missed the last hour, but I left it on and I've just reappeared. So sorry, what's happening? We're just introducing ourselves generally.
Saying, yeah, who you are.
Okay, cool. So at the start of the call, I mentioned that I'm an independent sustainability consultant, but I tend to introduce myself as a sustainability agitator because I sort of feel brands that I work with is to just really spur them into action and kind of challenge them to think about how they can both push their own footprint further, but also their communications and how they can use their brand voice to educate people on sustainability. And the majority of my career was at Innocent Drinks. So I was there until last year, joining them as a startup, and then moving into a role where I was head of sustainability there for a few years.
Cool. Anyone else? Marcos? You're muted. You're muted, Marcos.
Perhaps Marcos wants to stay muted.
So I just say I've been renovating my house for a year, and this is getting back to conference calls is a brand new thing to me. So I'm a little bit rusty, so apologies. Yeah, so I'm a new member, a friend of Louise's, and Louise very kindly introduced me to Gwyn. My hobby and passion is basically badgering sort of your domestic household product producers into being, improve their packaging, raising it as concerns. I probably slightly irritate them, but I am having quite a few successes with some as well. So that is good. So I'm sort of doing that on a daily basis at the moment, because I do find it, the sort of wastage and that a little bit sort of eats away at me. But on reflection, my job for probably about the last 17 years as a business analyst goes into big corporation, makes improvements in processes, or the sort of last resort is create software. I sort of reflected back on my history and I thought, well, I've worked for the likes of Shell, Chevron, the NHS, law firms, Rolls-Royce Civil Aviation, most of them with pretty when you look at their carbon footprint, is pretty hefty. But through those, they've all had a focus on sustainability, especially in petrochemical world with migrating animals and sharks and something in the background there, but obviously engineering at the forefront. But one thing I've been involved in for the last 10 years is working within software development, doing the Scrum Agile methodologies, which is basically creating great teams, so small teams of people that can make their own decisions, that we all work together. There is no hierarchy, and we're all equal. So rather than sort of these old structures of past where someone stood at the top and sort of briefed everyone, we're constantly refining things, we're minimizing wastage, and everyone feels that they can challenge things as well. So it's something I'm really passionate about, and lots of the projects I've worked on have effectively saved a lot of waste over the years. So sort of efficiencies, I sort of see them do having a positive thing. But definitely, if I can walk into a team and everyone feels equal, that's good. If people start looking at me and say, hey Marcus, can you take the lead on this? I was like, no, we can take it as a lead as a team, but I'm not here to lead you. So it's really good, and confidence, walk away with confidence, and we can all celebrate our successes. And so much of industry is about, yes, we finished this project, let's move on to the next one. But with this Scrum methodology, we would celebrate every 2 weeks. We would celebrate our failures and we'd celebrate our successes, and we'd say, what can we do to make this better? What can we do in the future? And if it's the corporations or the clients that are putting pressure on us, that's when I sort of have discussions with them saying, we are a team. This is what's wrong. Did he not see this again? If we saw that problem arise in the following 2 weeks, then we've really got a problem. So it gives us a voice every 2 weeks. Let's not wait a year. Let's every 2 weeks, we review what we've done and celebrate. And, and as we say, fail fast, not fail slowly. So that's me. So yeah, thank you very much for letting me join today as well. And thank you for the talk, Sandra.
That sounds like a very shamanic approach, because one of the things that a shaman would do is hold the space for other people, so that they can participate. So putting yourself in the center of things, it's about having the group evolve to do what it can do, its best potential, basically. That's wonderful. What a great description.
Thank you.
Who else would like to introduce themselves? I'm not going to go through everybody, or we might be here till next Tuesday, but who else would like to have a voice?
Yeah, may I go? This is Jagdish, since I'm from a little bit of far away from you guys. May I?
Go for it.
I'm based in Mumbai, India, and I joined the group on behalf of the AMSR program that I did 3 years ago. I also take a position as director on ASP. That's been quite a learning journey for me. I am a journalist based in India, and I work as a journalist in the non-profit space, and I earn a salary as a teacher in a business school. One of the reasons I joined this business school, which is also a non-profit, was they introduced ideas of spirituality in a business school, and successfully ran a program for 20 years on the science of spirituality. And one of my works there was writing a paper called, A Time for B Schools to Teach Spirituality. And the essential idea that we bring to participants, MBA participants, is that you come to an MBA program to lead others, and how might we do that if we don't know to lead ourselves? So today's talk has been very much in cohesion. I also noticed, unfortunately, that a lot of Indian business schools are actually not able to build on Indian ethos and ideas of this kind, and are borrowing from a lot of models that I would think are failed models in the West. So you would see more of an American kind of a business school in India than you would like, and that's frustrating. But in our school, we try to build that space and ask participants to look within for the answers. I recently wrote a book on ethics being brought out by Springer, which was titled "Teaching Ethics to Students in a Country Obsessed with GDP Growth." And I've also done a book-length conversation with Satish Kumar, which is right now, hopping, looking for a good publisher. And my idea has been to be able to bring voice to some of these ideas that are there, very lively, very exciting, but confined to smaller spaces. And how do you open them out to a newer audience? And the also discussed here at ASP with Helena particularly is to bring in ideas and open talking, so that we have more and more people sharing experiences and opening those spaces, which are very alive but in very small closed groups, and those voices can be heard a little more, I think, and they bring ideas and they bring energy of a different kind. So that's about me. Thank you.
There's a whole movement in the academy around spirituality in business. You probably
Yeah.
I think you might want to connect with Michael Pearson. I think he has a book series that might be interested.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that'll be nice.
He organizes humanist. He was head of the MSR group. So.
Oh, lovely. I'd love to. Yes. Maybe you can help connect me. Yes, certainly.
I'll put my email in if anybody wants to.
Sure. Thank you.
I'd like to invite David and or Jackie to say a few words, because I think this is the first meeting for both of them, so it'd be good to hear from them.
Jackie, you're still muted. You are muted.
Am I? Did you unmute me? Was it me? Sorry, I'm like trying to write a theory of change whilst listening, which is the most inefficient way to work ever. I currently am working for a NGO on a campaign, basically advocating for government regulation that would ensure a living wage for garment workers in global supply chains. So our focus is on regulation at EU level that will affect change in production countries outside the EU. So it's a very complex area of law because you're talking about extraterritorial change. So that's what I'm doing work-wise. And my background is very random. I worked with Gwyn on some lectures to do with fashion and sustainability. So I suppose my focus is kind of within the fashion industry. Yeah, and my background's kind of research and then law without being a lawyer. So kind of academic law and then, a bit of international development thrown in, working abroad. Kind of wanting to be on the ground. I sort of bring quite a range of things. My interest in sustainability is, I guess, really grown since I came back from working abroad, which is about 7 years ago. I live in Bournemouth, so I live quite near to Gwyn, and I started to get involved in local projects because I think my question at that time is, I've got these skills, what's going on in Bournemouth, because I'm an ex-Londoner, is there a place for me? And I spent quite a while getting involved in quite sort of local initiatives, and I think that's been a real education.
I'd just like to add something.
Working in this picture thing. Go on.
So I'd just like to add something to that. I invited Jackie to join me on a lecture course that Karen Thompson invited me to do. And Jackie's lecture got a standing ovation from the students.
You always say that.
I have never had that with my lectures, and I doubt if anyone else has in this room either. So she is a very talented lecturer and researcher.
My problem is it takes me so long to prepare that I can only deliver about one lecture in a year standard, because I like to make sure I know it inside out before I think about it.
You have to deliver the same lecture more than once then.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Yeah, and maybe that's why I like move on. I'm like, I've got that brain that sort of moves on to the next thing. I was going to say something else before I stopped talking. What was it? There you go. Inaction. Yeah, I don't know.
The thing that it strikes me is we all have different gifts. You know, assume the mantle of the shaman, and the key is to figure out where your gift is needed and start doing it. No one is going to solve, no one person is going to solve the world's problems. So there needs to be, and we live in, these are complex, adaptive,
Yeah,
wicked problems. And, you know, we each have to do our bit and hope that the ripple effects and maybe work the ripple effects in some ways, find the leverage point that you can use to bring about the best changes possible.
and I think one thing with our work is we're very aware that when you start talking about people paying living wages to workers, you're actually challenging the entire capitalist system. And so we do a lot of trying to stay covert, like not going there, so that people, almost like a little bit of a Trojan horse, we want to try and sneak through a little regulation that, you know, if it really got through and got implemented, you know, you can't change wages in one sector without starting to look at every sector. You just can't do it. So I think that's part of our battle. It's actually quite a big, it's almost like a very big thing, but we're focusing on a very sort of small part of the puzzle, kind of purpose. I think.
Yes, Meadows talks about changing mindsets, and metrics are another thing you can, if you change, you know, what we're looking, what we're paying, what we're doing, and those are very powerful levers for change. And yes, you can create cascade effects, I think, by doing some of those things. Someone mentioned neoliberalism, and I've got a critique of neoliberalism in an alternative. I just put the paper in the chat if anybody's interested in it. Because when we think about the big nays, cultural mythology is really neoliberalism. And that's the one that's the mythology that's sick, diseased. It's creating all kinds of problems, but people are totally bought into it, especially in business and economists. And until we change the sort of ideas, the core ideas that are embedded in our economics, we are getting nowhere. So this paper is my attempt to push that conversation along.
I can mute again now.
Okay, and I think, Gwyn, you asked me to introduce myself as well. If Jackie's finished her fascinating background, and always hard to describe sort of, yeah, where I come from and what have you. Eclectic is probably the easiest word. Started out life in accountancy, moved into communications, then into international sales, then into a bit of education and training policy work, and then back into accountancy. And that kind of has ended up moving more into sustainability reporting and helping sort of businesses embed sustainable approaches within what they do. So I tend to describe myself nowadays as a lion tamer. So Monty Python fans, you'll know where that comes from. Because yeah, that's kind of my kind of sense of humor. I work for myself, live on a farm. We kind of grow our own stuff and keep our own chickens and yada, yada, yada as well, which is nice, and kind of reflects where we try to come from, because we try to live what we do and, you know, practice what we preach kind of stuff, as most of us do. Other than that, it's kind of, like most people, finding my way in an incredibly complicated and world that gets me very upset and angry quite a lot, which I get an awful lot of. Sort of someone who sort of desperately wants to make a difference and gets frustrated when I think change doesn't happen as fast as one would like. But I think we're all in that kind of boat. We all want the world to be a better place much faster, and so yeah, do my bit and see where we go. But yeah, I'm kind of just eclectic and do what I can, really, but with sort of an accounting sort of bias, just because that's where I started out and where I've lived most of my kind of life, which makes life really weird because politically I'm kind of very much on the left end of the spectrum, which makes me a very weird, very odd company amongst most accountants who tend not to be.
Try being me in a finance-dominated business school.
Yeah, so I quite look forward to reading your article about the critique of the neoliberal stuff, because I'm very definitely not a neoliberal. Yeah, so it's interesting, but yeah, it's very much a sort of trying to work with what I suppose one of the things I'm really trying to do with at the moment is work with sort of smaller businesses to try and get them on the sustainability journey, because bigger companies, there's the ISO 14001, all that kind of nonsense. But my view is that there seems to be a bit of a gap for sort of smaller businesses and purpose-driven businesses to get the whole sustainability agenda embedded in what they do and embedded into their businesses, above and beyond just what the owner thinks and what the owner or the person who set the business up wants to do, and how do you embed that culture into the business as well. So that's kind of where I come from. So I did my master's research on corporate culture and that kind of stuff. So again, that kind of feeds in quite nicely to sort of kind of what I try and do with businesses.
So I have another paper on the fact that businesses aren't going to change till the ecosystem around them changes. And so I was just reflecting on what Jackie was saying about working with supply chain issues, and what you were talking about, David, with the accounting perspective. And so if you thought about a leverage point there, if you could get companies to internalize their costs into their business models, that has to be done by everybody having to do it at the same time, obviously. So otherwise you put one company at a disadvantage over the others because they had more costs. But if you could get everybody doing that in some way, that requires a change of law, which is back to what Jackie was talking about. So, you know, you could see a connection between your accountancy interest and understanding the need to do that, and Jackie's interest in public policy and how to shift public policy around some of those interests. I mean, so to go back to what Robert was asking earlier, how does this group figure out what it wants to do as a group? If you want to sort of take on a more activist role, find those connections, see where there's little pockets of interest, you know, get people working together in new ways to find those leverage points and move on. Fun stuff. Jackie, you are muted.
I don't know what we're discussing, but I think that's so true. And one of our biggest struggles is that issue of, so there's been even Henny's did a project to implement living wages, and they had this big statement about how many of their sort of percentage of their supply chain they would reach within a time frame, and then the whole proposal and the plan that they put out just disappeared off their site. And I think the reality is they found it very, very hard to do because of that exact issue. It's almost like you need everybody to do it at once. And I think there's businesses who really want to pay better wages, but who find it really struggle to implement it, who signed up to kind of multi-stakeholder initiatives to work on it. And I think there's something almost, so at the EU at the moment, there's a law to try and bring in more sustainable corporate governance, but the intel is that kind of one of the big pushbacks is against director liabilities. So what all the business say is we want voluntary codes, we don't want a regulation. But the difficulty with voluntary codes is there's always going to be people who don't follow them who will have the competitive edge. And it's almost like we've got to make that business case, I think, of being able to say to businesses, it's in your favor to have regulation. And that's one thing I think if someone could make that business case, it would be amazing.
So I have a problem with the business case. For years, I thought change business if you could show them that it was paid to be more responsible. So I did a lot of research on that, and that's why I have so many citations that David mentioned earlier. It ain't happening. You gotta change the ecosystem. And one of the things neoliberalism has done is say, laissez-faire government, get government. Yeah, Margaret Thatcher, you know, there's no such thing as society, or Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, you know, get government off our backs. And we collectively have bought into that logic. But the pandemic has shown us nothing. It's shown us that we need to shift that thinking. We need government, we need regulation, and no single business is going to undertake paying. I mean, some will, you know, but most businesses aren't going to undertake paying better wages or improving their supply chains until there's pressure on them to do so from the ecosystem. I'll send Gwen that paper as well, because it doesn't make any sense competitively for them to do it. They are doing exactly what we ask them to do right now. They are doing exactly what society wants them to do. If society changes its demands by changing the regulations around business, by changing the expectations, by changing the standards businesses have to live up to, then businesses will shift. That's what they do. I mean, they're good at it. So, you know, so we have to bring government back in a very positive way. Not some of the leaders we've had recently.
I couldn't imagine who you mean. I'm going to keep us to time. I know a number of people have had to leave and they've posted their thanks into the chat button. I've actually met and been treated by a real life shaman in the Bolivian jungle. So I thought I'd throw that in there as my parting shot. But all it leaves me to do really is to thank the outgoing directors, the incoming director, those of you that showed up, and particularly to Sandra for her insights, which have stimulated a debate today. And I'm going to let us close the meeting, maybe taking a moment, camera off if you wish, just to think about the meeting privately, and then still have 2 minutes to use the loo before your next Zoom meeting, which I feel is always good practice. So I'll leave it open. Yes, go on.
Say thank you to everyone. I do have another meeting to get to, so I was triple booked this morning. So
thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. This was really fun.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Sandra.
Bye-bye.
I'll send the paper to Gwen.
I think we've got it actually. But Karen, would you like to quickly introduce yourself before everyone shoots off?
Oh my goodness, I think everybody's going, aren't they, Gwen?
Go on.
I was having a bit of a conversation with Robert in the chat there, but Jackie's still here. Nice to see you again, Jackie. Well, for those that don't know me, I'm co-founder of a movement called Responsible Project Management, for which we owe, the whole of ASP, but especially Gwen, who's been with us on that journey. And I keep sort of coming back to the fact that we very much took on board, and I don't know how much of this you know, Gwen, but last summer, the APM, who are the national body for project management, that's my background, I'm an academic in project management. So we started Responsible Project Management now. With a manifesto, we followed the style of creating a manifesto, and we've got a lot of individual sign-ups to that now, and a few corporates, but that's where we sort of want to put our effort now. Back last summer, I think it was, I'm just thinking about what we're hearing on the news at the minute about the select committees. The APM recommended Responsible Project Management to one of the select committees for all government major projects. And what I was particularly pleased about, because we very much built on not only the work of ASP, but also the responsible management literature, of which there is quite a lot, and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. But the definition, and I'm forever quoting Gwen's very simple definition of sustainability, which is enough for everyone forever, because so many people still think it's just about the environment, and I think we have to put people at the centre of that. So I'm forever quoting Gwyn on that. But the definition actually used in the report from the select committee actually had the definition that we came up with for responsible project management, which you may remember, Gwyn, was all about that shift to conscious awareness. And I keep coming back to that, and I'm distilling at the moment, sort of, because we've got 10 principles in the manifesto, but actually taking it back, there are 3 value statements, and those are at the real heart, and they totally are aligned and resonate with ASP. And so we drew heavily on a lot of your work here. So I suppose what I'd most like to say is a huge thank you. I'm actually I've been in 2 meetings this afternoon, so my apologies I haven't been entirely here, but we've got some very exciting research that's been funded that we're looking at sustainability competencies, especially in the field of project management. It's probably too few people here, but we were just trying to work out, because we've been running a series of one-day workshops that in project management, I mean, people pay lots of money to go to project management workshops, so we're trying to get people signed up. We're doing these as experimental events to try to work out what new competences are needed. And again, I think you know this, Gwyn, we couldn't find a way to measure the impact of our event, because there's lots of ideas out there about sustainability mindset and what this is, but nobody had actually created an instrument for measuring it. So one of the things I've had to do as part of that research project is to create it, and we are using that very much based on all the ideas that I got from this group and from Gwyn. It's all about obviously the 3 pillars and the thinking, being, doing dimensions. And what I'll do as soon as we've just done our research, because we don't want to contaminate our results from that, but is make a generic version of that survey so that anybody can go in and do it and see your sustainability tendencies. We're using it before and after our events to measure the impact. So I'm hoping lots of people working in the education field in sustainability will also be able to use that instrument for that. And so we're getting some very exciting results. Not surprisingly, those of you that work in this field in education will be aware values are the hardest thing to shift. So knowledge, we can shift that quite easily. Values by far the hardest, and the doing bit falls between those 2. So anyway, yeah, so we're on a very exciting journey. If this group would like a workshop run on responsible project management, it's scenario based. We take people through either a construction project scenario or a technology project scenario. We're running one tomorrow that is a construction project scenario. Probably a bit late, because the other thing we've been doing, we had to, in the crisis, we had to run them online, but we sent people out either Lego Serious Play or Ketso Connect, that is another tactile thing that you can go away, do some model building, and you come back and you talk about it. And obviously that bit you do have to do on the screen, unfortunately, but it's not sitting at the screen all day. Yeah, anyway, so if any, I mean, I can just quickly put, let's just find a quick link to put in. Oh, I've already put it in actually for Robert earlier. I'll just share it with everybody. Control C in the chat. Here we are. Oh, hang on, let's just do this to everybody. Everyone.
I'll put your Alliance page on the ASP site up there. So that's
yes, of course,
yeah,
it is from your stuff, isn't it? Yeah. So the last of our schedule tomorrow, but I mean, I'd love to put on another one. I think we probably need a minimum of about 8 people to make it viable and a meaningful experience. If ASP members, if you wanted one for ASP especially, we could certainly do that. And obviously, if your organisations would like to do one, or you know any project managers that would like to go on a responsible project management workshop, do come along and do get in touch with us.
Cool.
Okay, thank you, Gwyn, for that opportunity.
Thanks, Karen. Sounds like that might be something to do with the Marcus. I suspect Marcus might be interested in that.
Well, my brain was churning away there, because I'm sort of looking, yeah, it would be interesting to have a conversation, because I'm usually caught right in between project management and the projects and the business and all that stuff, using the agile methodologies as well, which is a very sort of, yeah, different approach, should we say. So it'd be quite interesting to sort of see where that sort of touches on that.
If you know Agile, you'll know they started with a manifesto, and people say,
yeah, that's what I live and breathe. I'm not going to recite it to you though.
It's changing project management in 50 years.
It does. I get brought into places where the project management are doing one thing, the software are doing the other, and they bring me in and say, right, can you bring the 2 together, please? And it's like, well, okay, we all need to sit down and have a grown-up chat. So yeah, no, it's something I've been doing for years. So it'd be great to have a chat on that.
Lego Serious Play is great. We think everybody should be using it now to model things, because it's thinking with your fingers. It's really getting people out of the box and away from text-based stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Lastly, John Grantham's been sitting there very quietly. And John, would you like to say a few words about what you do? Because I know you're doing some pretty cool projects in Bournemouth.
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm working on a community logistics project, which is inspired by the work that Transition Streets did, which went on to inspire the Dorset Green Living Project. That's about getting together, creating groups of neighbours to support the transition to sustainability. Transition network called them transition hubs, and I did it. I joined a group, and it was a really it was a really useful experience, and I thought, gosh, this is potentially really powerful, because the idea is that you're sort of getting to know your neighbours better for the purpose of living more sustainably. So everybody that is in the group has got that in common. Everybody wants to live more sustainably, but we're all kind of stuck in our patterns of behaviour, and so you've got this group of very different people in a room together, and I think just by doing that, it acts as a kind of catalyst for change. So I thought it's potentially a powerful concept. And then, and because I've got a background in logistics, transportation and logistics, I noticed that there's a parallel between the idea of these transition hubs, neighbourhood hubs, which are groups of neighbours all occupying the same sort of geographical space. Potentially, there's an opportunity there to use those hubs to consolidate deliveries and consolidate orders, and this kind of this is a kind of link to the idea of the new sort of recognition that with the growth in home delivery services and the current system is unsustainable because it's uncoordinated. You've got numerous third-party courier services and supermarket services all sending their diesel vans into our neighbourhoods to do deliveries. And anyway, so yeah, that's what I want to try and do. The next stage of the project is to recruit a team of hub coordinators. So I want to try and recruit people that are passionate about sustainability and are passionate about the local sort of supporting the local economy, because it's about connecting households, groups of households with local suppliers. And so that is to find those people that are that are prepared to actually go and knock on their neighbours' doors and start talking to them about hubs. So yeah, it's quite a daunting prospect, but yeah, I'd be grateful for any suggestions on how it's possible to recruit and train a team of hub coordinators. Specifically, this is for an 8-month pilot project. I'm going to be offering free zero carbon deliveries to the suppliers that take part in it. The hub coordinators will get free home deliveries. So yeah, it's a kind of marketing research exercise, which hopefully will inform, which will hopefully increase the likelihood of investment funding for a launch at scale. So I'm looking at creating a small network of hubs across the BCP area in a wide variety of different neighbourhoods. So I want to try and get information about how people respond to these ideas in, for example, an area of deprivation, places like Boscombe. So, for example, so I want to sort of see how the different demographics and customer profiles respond to this idea, and then use that to inform a marketing strategy for a wider launch.
Super. Yeah, it's called the Green TLC, isn't it, John?
Well, the social enterprise that I've created to deliver the project is called the Green TLC, which stands for the Green Transportation Logistics Company. The Green TLC does a number of other things. We do bike mechanics, doctor bike clinics, cycle maintenance workshop. But the main project that we exist for is the community logistics project.
Yeah, I've put a link in the chat because I think it's a fascinating project that really could be replicated and supported in lots of different localities. So it would be fabulous. Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see what happens, how it develops.
Cool. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are 10 minutes over time, which is nothing to worry about at all, unless you've got kids you want to stay away from, and you can use this as an excuse. Yeah, I'd just like to, my bit, I like Robert, I became a grandfather last year, and Robert and I had lots of talks last year and worked with a couple of ladies in setting up a sense-making council. So a lot of what Sandra said today really resonates with what we've been on. But for my journey at the moment is just I'm trying to learn how to be an elder, just so an apprenticeship of how to start creating intergenerational meetings. And you know, the people we had today here, Hannah, Luke, and Georgia, who are our new social media team at ASP, are first part of that. I've just been invited by a former member of ASP to talk to an MSc group in Bath University, a bunch of students who are also looking for a place to come and stay. And next week, the global, I can't remember what it's called, but it's the global careers group of Bournemouth University is hosting a meeting where we're also, Luke and I, giving a short presentation on ASP and what it can offer. So fundamentally, my shout out is we want to reach out to students, recent students, graduates, undergraduates, postgraduates, to start enriching these sort of conversations. I don't know about you, I was deeply moved by George's and Hannah's contributions today. I think they change the way we react, they change the way we behave with each other for the better, as I'm sure Robert is finding with his delightful grandchild. You know, I'm finding that I've lost a daughter recently. I don't know whether you feel it, Robert. When I go to see my daughter now with her daughter, I actually see a mother and daughter, not my daughter and daughter. So, you know, I'm really kicking into this idea that the more intergenerational meetings we have, the better as a species will be. So that's my just takeaway from today. And I love Sandra's concept of transformational catalyst. I think maybe that's what ASP could learn to become as well, as a new purpose to grow into, because I think that's really what all of us are doing in our own different ways, and combining these strengths into this single purpose could be really interesting. So if anyone wants to pick up that chat later, I'd be really happy to pick that up. So thank you all for your brilliant contributions and your time today, and I really look forward to seeing you in further meetings, and hope that you'll all gaggle together via the gaggle mail to each other, because I'm sure there's lots of cross-fertilization going on there. Great to see new David and John turn up here the first time, and Jackie re-engaging, and Marcus, yep, and Jagdish in India. We've got some international states there. And Louise, Rob, everyone else, thank you very much. I'm going to leave this chat open if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to take my leave because I've got family matters to attend to. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Gwen.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Fabulous.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.